Hey guys, welcome to the part 2 of how to record an acapella arrangement in FL Studio. In the previous video, we covered the basics of the arrangement and also the recording. And in this video, we're going to be covering everybody's favorite, mixing. Yes, so I'm going to walk you through how I mixed the song, every element in the song, what processing I'm applying to each element, and how I got to the final result, and especially what is on my master bus, to give it that last shine and glue and loudness and all that nice mixing stuff. So yeah, let's get into the video. If you haven't watched the last video, I'm going to be leaving a card up above, somewhere at the top, and also down in the description so that you can check it out and see what we are working with. But I'm also going to play, a snippet of what we had from the recording. Then we can move into how we are mixing the song. So let's go.
Ashawo boy don't love you. Don't dribble Maradona. Amy 30 miss call. Them don't dribble player.
Alright, so that's what we're working with. And the first thing I had to do before I started mixing was to route everything to their own mixer insert. And the way I did that was to double click on each one and make sure that they are assigned to a mixer track. So all of the kick is sent to channel 2, all of the rim shots to channel 3, the snare to channel 4, both of them to channel 4, the shakers to channels 5, 6, and so on and so forth. I've also labeled all the tracks. I've named them, I've color coded them so that they are easy for me to see, to know what I'm working with and where I'm at every point in time. I've also gone ahead to pan things around and also pull down the levels to a reasonable extent, just to a place where there is a balance and then, something we can work with. So let's start with the kick, see all the processing I'm doing on the kick, and then, work our way up from there. Yeah, let me loop this section. So first, with all the processing off, of course, all the processing is off. Here's what our kick sounds like. So the first thing I had on was noise suppression. There was a lot of noise the day I recorded this song. So what I did was to suppress the noise in the session itself. So I have NS1 to do that, and it's taking away some of the ambient noise, some of the background noise from the recording so that we can have a cleaner sounding kick. You can hear before, after. So you can tell we lost some attack, but yeah, it's something I was willing to trade off. It's a trade-off I was willing to do just to remove the noise from the kick. The next thing I did was to EQ. I'm removing some low end all the way up to 30 hertz and then rolling off the high end as well, all the way up to 9.5K, and then doing some dips in places where I know I would not be needing those sounds to be coming from the kick. So with the EQ, it sounds like this. Without, with, and then the next thing, this is what is giving me the actual low end from the kick, and it is subsynth from Plugin Alliance. And here's what it sounds like. An alternative you can do is to use R-Bass from Waves, and R-Bass gives you, the ability to inject or to add some sub-harmonics to it. So you select what sub-harmonics you want to add and add to it. Why I like subsynth is you have a range of sub-harmonics you can add. So here we have from 24 hertz to 36 hertz, I believe. And then from 36 hertz, man, I need to get my glasses. From 36 hertz to about 50 plus hertz. Then from 56 hertz to all the way up to 80 hertz. So we can add small increments of each of these frequency ranges to give it that powerful low end that a kick deserves to have. So with the sub synth, this is what we're having. Without it, with it, it's giving me that low end, that that thud that a kick needs, and also that punch. The next thing I'm adding is Pro MB, just to control the dynamics of the frequency range. Because it's coming from my mouth, a lot of frequencies are going to be jumping out here and there, so I'm using the Pro MB to control each of these different frequency bands to make sure that we have a solid kick that still has the attack and still has that low end weight. Without it, now it's beginning to sound more like a kick. So what I'm doing here in this frequency range from 45 all the way up to 100 is I'm expanding instead of compressing. So whenever the kick hits at that point, because that is where the fundamental of the kick is supposed to be, I'm pushing up that part of the frequency instead of ducking it down. And then I'm using this area to control that very top end of the kick, which I do not want. So this is functioning as a compressor and as well as an EQ. I'm shaving off or controlling heavily the high end and the high mids from the kick. Sounding nice. And then the next thing is compression to bring back the attack that I initially lost. So what I'm doing is I have the attack at 30, which is going to allow all of the transients pass through, and then I have the release at 0.3 seconds. It's a relatively fast attack, but not the fastest attack. And then I'm pulling down the threshold. Before that, I have the ratio set at 4, and then I'm pulling down the threshold till I'm getting about 3 to 4 dB of gain reduction. So this is helping us bring back that attack that we lost when we had the noise suppression. Yeah. Now it's sounding a lot like a kick. And then the next thing I'm doing is using the SSL-G channel from Waves. And what I'm doing is I'm removing a lot of the low-end rumble around 35 Hertz. I'm taking away, some of it. And then also the mod around 390 Hertz. I'm removing all of that as well. Taking, not all of it, I'm removing some of it. And then some of that very, I don't know, it sounds like paper or like a carton to me. I'm removing all that carton-ish frequency from the high mids of the kick. And then I'm pushing up the high end at 8K just a little bit to bring the kick forward in the mix a little bit. So without the EQ, here's what it sounds like. And then with the EQ, so we've really carved this kick, to take it from sounding like just noise produced from the mouth to sounding like an actual kick. I'm going to try to rush this so that we don't have a very lengthy video. The next I have Decapitator, just to push out that kick a little bit more, give it more grit, and make sure that you hear it and it comes out well on, especially on smaller speakers. Saturating the kick just a little bit. And then the last we have the SSL EQ, again, just to really carve the frequencies and make sure that what we have is what we want. So I'm doing a low cut all the way up to 35, and then around 160 I'm removing a couple dBs as well. Around 350 Hertz I'm taking out some of those frequencies too. And then at 3K, which is where the attack of the kick is, I'm pushing it up a ton, and then I'm not doing anything on the super high frequency. So now with all of the processing, here's what our kick sounds like. Coming from this to this. Right, so the next is the rim shots. Okay, so for the rim shots, we'll just go over everything quickly. Coming from this, first thing I had on is noise suppression. Again, also doing EQ, taking out all the low end rumble and then carving out some unnecessary resonances. So with those two processing, here's what we have. And then the next thing is SSL comp. I'm using this to, bring out the attack and really glue the rim shot and have it, sounding pretty consistent. Because for this one, I did not select a particular rim shot to work with. I'm using everything just the way I recorded it. So I'm doing a fair amount of compression so that I can have a consistent rim shot performance. Next is a FET compressor using the 1176 Bluey from Waves. Very fast release, also very fast attack, but not the fastest, to control the extra peaks that are jumping out that will cause problem down the line. Without the compressors, with the compressors, and then the next thing I have is the EQ SSL-G channel. I'm beginning to like this SSL channel strip a lot because it helps me get to my desired results faster than regular EQs. So what I'm doing here is I'm pushing up a little of the bottom end around the fundamental, which is 150, 148, 150 hertz. I'm pushing it up a little bit. I'm taking out the mod, that really boxy sound. I'm taking it out a little bit, and then at 3K, I'm pushing it up a little just so we can get that, attack and that forwardness from the rim shot, and then just adding a little bit of brightness around 8K. Then the next thing I have is the parametric EQ, rolling off a lot of the low end rumble and then dealing with this frequency resonance that I'm hearing here, and then also taming the highs a little bit. And then I'm also clipping because the performance is really it's a varying performance. Sometimes I have it, the peak is low, sometimes it's a very spiky peak. So I just use the clipper to shave off the excess peaks that I do not need so that I can have a consistent rim performance. You can see. You can see some of them are not being touched at all by the clipper. Some of them were just being clipped, a fair bit, a little bit, while some are being clipped a lot. So that is helping us maintain a steady peak level. And the next we have is the snare. Not a lot is going on with the snare, just SSL comp, again, fast attack, slow attack rather, and a fast release 4:1 ratio, and then pulling down the threshold till I'm getting about 3 to 4 dB of gain reduction, and then SSL channel strip, again pushing up the low end a little, not a little, a lot, but then I'm listening to make sure that it sounds really good in the context of the mix. Also, I'm pulling out some of the low end mod, pushing up a little bit of the presence, and as well a tiny bit of the high end. And this is what it sounds like. Okay, the next I have the shakers, which I'm really not doing so much, just EQ, having the sound, making sure that I have only what I need and removing every unnecessary frequency that is not contributing to the overall sound. and I've sent all of the shakers to a shakers bus, which I'm still doing more processing, not a lot anyway. I'm taking away all of the very, very low end stuff, which we're not going to be needing, and then pushing up a little bit of, what's that now? A little bit of 500, just to give it body, a little bit, and then pulling out 2K-ish, 2.7K, just pulling it out a little so that it's not competing with the vocals, the lead vocals and other vocals, because the shakers are consistent throughout the song and I don't want it competing with every other element that's coming up. And then I'm brightening up the shakers a little bit at around 8K, just to make sure that you can hear it, it's audible, but then it's not really, really in your face. Okay, so we're not hearing that effect from the SSLG channel or even any of the channels because all of these are off. So let's go ahead and turn them on and let's hear. Now for the bass, the way I like to treat bass when I'm dealing with acapella is I like to duplicate the bass and then treat them as two separate entities. So for one, I'm going to isolate just the subs and then deal with that separately as a sub. And then the other one, I'm going to deal with it as the body and more of like the mid-range of the bass, which is what I've done. So this is the exact same take. I just duplicated it. So this is the original take up top, and then this is duplicate down below. And then I've routed this one to channel 9 and then this one to channel 10. So which is what we have here, 9 and 10. This is the bass sub, and then this is the actual bass. So let's look at what we are doing with the actual bass first before we get into what we're doing with the sub. So what I'm doing here is just taking out, first of all, I've rolled off the very, very low end stuff all the way up to 150, 160 thereabouts, so that I can treat that separately and then treat the low end, everything from 150 below separately. So I have the high pass engaged up to 160. I'm also still rolling off everything below 190, still, taking that down a bit. Also taking down the mod and then pushing up the presence around the mid-range, and then I'm not doing anything to the high end. And then I'm sending that to a bass bus, which we're going to be looking at what's happening there a little bit later. Let's hear what it sounds like without any processing first. Alright, so the first thing I have on is EQ to take out everything below 250, right? And then I'm also high passing it up to 40, and this is what it sounds like. And then the next thing, I'm using good old sub synth again to introduce more sub harmonics to it, to give it that bigness that a bass should have. So here's what we have with sub synth. What I'm doing is I'm pushing up this 34 to 50 range a little, all the way up to 45, and then I'm pushing up this one all the way up to 31. That's from 56 to about 80, and then I'm increasing this sub harmonics all the way up to 94, which is giving us this. So another thing I'm doing is I messed with these two knobs. I don't know exactly what they do and how they work, but while I was dialing in the knobs, I was listening to make sure I liked what I was getting. So I have this all the way up to 60 Hertz and then this all the way up to 10. So I cranked them up all the way, and that's what's giving us this really, really heavy low end sound from the bass. So now that we have all that low end energy going on, I'm using this to tame those frequencies so that they are not, all over the place, and then messing with the mix. So for everything from 300 upwards, I'm just, really compressing, pulling it down because this is the sub bass and I don't need everything from 300 upwards. So you can see I'm really squashing that. And then for this range from 100 up to here, I'm just pulling that down, compressing it a little bit because that's like the attack of the sub bass, or the attack of the sub bass. And I didn't want it to, be too upfront. I wanted there to be the attack, but then not to be too upfront. So I'm just controlling that a little bit. And the super low end, fast attack, fast release, make sure that the low end is really, really consistent and glued, because what you don't want is having your sub bass all over the place. When you're listening on big speakers, it's going to really be a problem. So what I want to do is to glue it, keep it in place, and keep it pretty consistent while still being full and beefy. So as you can hear, the sub bass is still full, but then there is no particular note that's jumping out at you unnecessarily. And then the next thing I'm doing to still control the entire sub bass is CLA2A from Waves, and I'm just, dialing in the knobs to get 1 to 2 dB of compression. All of this is so that we can have a super consistent sub bass, which is really what you want. And then I'm just saturating it a little bit so that, we can hear it a little bit more, especially on smaller speakers and speakers that do not have so much bass response. And then the next thing is I'm using the SSL channel to really carve the sound to make sure that we're getting exactly what we need. So what I'm doing is pushing up a little bit of 51, pulling down everything that's around 500 because it was sounding really, really hollow and it's making it not sound very clear. So I'm pulling all that out, and around 650 hertz, I'm pulling that down a little bit because it was sounding really nasally, and I want the low end to really be, big but not boomy, not nasally, clear but still full. Which is what we have here. And by the time we combine it with this guy, now we have best of both worlds. So the original bass and the sub bass. So I'm sending those two to the bass bus, where I'm doing, still carving the sound. This time around, I'm carving both of them together so that they are glued together and sound like one single unit of bass, if that makes any sense. Yeah, so I'm pushing up the low end a little bit, pulling out more of the mod frequencies around 400, pushing up the mid-range a little bit so that I can get that presence from it, and also the high end at around 8K. I'm also filtering out everything below 30 hertz, and this is what we have. So you can hear the bass is still up front, and then that sub bass is still there, representing and holding down the low end. And then the next thing I'm doing is, this is typically just a side chain, just for side chaining. I'm side chaining the kick to this so that every time the kick hits, the really, really low end stuff just ducks out a little bit, because I wouldn't want the sub bass and the kick, competing a lot for this low frequency spot. So what I'm doing is making sure that every time the kick hits, the bass ducks out of the way. The sub bass especially ducks out of the way of the kick, just a tiny, tiny bit. And then after that, I'm using the EQ, SSL EQ again, just to really, really carve the sound of the bass. So what I'm doing is I'm pushing up a little bit around 100, to give it that body and weight, and then taking a little out from 400 and also a little out from 2.4K. And then I'm boosting the highs a little bit at 8K. And this is what that is giving us. So yeah, there you have it. The drums and the bass sounding really, really nice. All of them sounding nice together. And then after that, we're moving on to the vocals. So first is this, the main BGVs that we have, which sound like this. So what I've done is I've taken all the three performances or three instances or three layers, whichever one you choose to call them, and pan them a little to the left, and then to the right, just to spread it out a little bit, and then send it to a bus. So in that bus, I'm cutting out everything that's below 90. I'm just, taking that out a little bit, and then I'm also doing a low cut up to about 150 because I don't need anything from 150 and below. Well, I listened and I didn't need any of that. Next thing, I'm taking out from 600, that nasal range. I'm taking it out a little bit, pushing up just a tad bit of 2.8K, and then pushing up the highs a little bit to get this sound. Coming from this to this. Crisp, clean, clear. There's not so much to be done. And then the next is this, which I'm doing, of course, something similar, taking all of them, panning them around to create that wideness, and then doing the SSL channel again. Similar approach, high passing all the way up to 110, taking out the very low end stuff, taking out as well the nasal boxy frequencies, and then pulling back this mid-range just a little bit because I found out that frequency range was sounding a bit harsh, and then I'm pushing up the high end at around 10K, and it sounds like this. And then the harmonies. Basic panning, I'm not doing anything on the individual channels, and then I'm sending them all to a bus where I'm doing, EQ stuff, taking out low end, taking out boxy frequencies, pushing up the highs, and just doing all that good stuff with the SSL channel strip. So like I said, I am beginning to enjoy using this channel strip because it gets me to my desired result a lot faster. So with all the harmonies and with all the processing, so this is the next one. Similar thing, you can pause the video to look at the settings, and all of them together with all their processing sounds like this. And as you can see, I'm sending all of these subgroups to the BGV bus, which I'm still doing more processing to it. So the first thing I'm doing is adding saturation. I'm using the NLS from Waves, and then I'm adding about 3 of the drive knob, pushing it, cranking it up to 3, and then the next I'm gluing them with the LA2A. I should be getting about 2 or 3 dB of compression, just to glue all of them together. Let's hear what that's sounding like so far. Right? And then the next thing, I'm still compressing them, to make sure that they are really gelled together. I'm doing 10 milliseconds of attack, and then 0.3 seconds release, 2:1 ratio, and then pulling down the threshold to get 1 to 2, at the most 3 dB of gain reduction. And then I'm carving the sound with this SSL channel, doing the necessary boosts and cuts where I found necessary. Doing the necessary boosts and cuts where I found necessary. Man, I really should learn how to speak English. Okay. All right, moving on. For the chorus section, we have the lead vocals, which sound like this. So the first thing I'm doing is tuning. As you must have observed, I did not tune any of the BGV vocals. I could have, but this was like a rushed mix, so I didn't tune it. Yeah, still sounds nice without the tuning, and I still worked with it that way. Right, so for the lead vocals, this is what I have: tuning, auto tenor, key of F major, and then I'm pushing the retune speed all the way up, to get maximum tuning, because usually I would do manual tuning before auto tune, but because I don't usually work in FL Studio and I didn't want to start exporting to Cubase, doing the tuning there and then bringing it back. I know FL Studio has its own manual tuning algorithm, but I don't know how to use it and I didn't want to bother. So I'm pushing up the retune speed all the way up to the top and then using the flex tune to control how much of the auto tune sound that I want. And so at this point, it sounded really okay to me, sounded natural, and still sounds tuned. And then the next thing, I'm adding the NLS channel. I have it on the spike setting, which is like the SSL setting. And then I'm pushing it up to 3 to, give it some extra saturation and harmonics. And then the next thing is EQ, pulling out low end. First of all, I'm doing a high cut up to 81, taking out minus 6 dB of 80, pulling out this nasal frequency at 700 Hertz, pulling it out a little bit, pulling out the harshness from 4K a little bit, and then boosting at 10K to sound like this. Then the next I have Decapitator, just to give it some extra grit and then push it forward in the mix a little bit more. And my first compressor is CLA76 from Waves, and I have it at a very fast attack and a relatively slow release, which is still fast for this type of compressor, but I'm doing it so that I can retain a lot of the transients and the attack of the vocals. So you can see there's not a lot going on with the gain reduction. So it's just to make sure that whenever there is really any word or phrase that jumps out, it just catches it and pulls it back a little bit. And then this one, the LA2A, I'm using it to give the vocals a little bit more body and then still control the dynamics a little bit. You can see how it immediately sounds up front in the mix. The next, I have the SSL EQ, just to carve the sound and give it its final definition in the mix. I'm taking out a little bit from 70. I'm not doing anything here. And then I'm boosting about 1 dB around 2.4 and just a little at 10K. Yeah, and then the next I have is the Pro MB, just to control the entire frequency spectrum of the lead vocals, control it to make sure that everything is consistent, everything is the same from beginning all the way up to the end. Alright, so that's what you have for everything that's in the chorus. And now moving on to the verse, let's loop this section. Alright, so for the BGVs in the verse section, I have panning going on the individual channels, and then on the subgroups, I just have EQ and compression. Feel free to pause the video to look at the settings, but I've just dialed in the settings to make sure that I'm getting only what I need and taking out everything that I do not need. And then the compression, I'm doing 4:1, 10 milliseconds attack, fast release, and then pulling down the threshold to get at most 4 dB of gain reduction on each of them. So let's hear what they sound like before any of this processing. And then after. And then I've routed all of the subgroups to another bus, which I've called the BGVs verse bus, where I'm doing more processing on them. The first thing I have is, again, the EQ, taking out the lows, taking out the boxiness, pushing up the high end a little bit, bringing down harshness and, nasal frequencies, just doing the necessary things that I need to do while listening. And that is one of the reasons why I like this EQ, is that it forces me to listen instead of to watch, the spectrum analyzer and then make my decisions based on that. So this one forces me to really listen what is helping the sound, what is not helping the sound. And then another reason I like using this EQ is that it's a console EQ. So it's also injecting that console flavor, that analog flavor, a little bit of it in the recording or in the mix. So it's giving me that analog vibe. So since I have it across the entire mix, it's going to be injecting that vibe more and more and more, making my mix sound a lot more analog, give it a little bit more depth, and just all of that, as against just using a digital EQ to do all of this processing. So I have that EQ going on, and then the next thing, I'm compressing the bus, compressing all of them together. Again, 10 milliseconds, and then I have a longer release setting, 1.2, so that it clamps down and then just really holds onto it. But I have the ratio set at 2:1, so that means it's not doing a lot. This is just making sure that the peaks are not going over and beyond and just messing up the entire mix. I should pull this back a little bit. That seems like it's too much compression. Yeah, sounds a lot better already. And then fresh air, to just, make it pop a little bit more in the mix. I'm pushing up really the very high end sparkle, just 10%, not so much. But then it's adding a lot of brightness and color and air to the background vocals. Before, after. And then I'm using this S1 imager to just spread it out, make it wide and help it to occupy the entire stereo image. And for the lead vocals, what I have,
I used to think that I was a player, but right now see the man's on the bench. Other girls like Acapella.
Okay, let's quickly go over that. First thing I'm doing is I'm tuning it. I don't have it at the highest setting, which is the retune speed this time around. And the flex tune, I have it around 65, just to make sure that it's tuned, but not very aggressive tuning, And then NLS channel as well, SSL, pushing it up by 4 to get that drive, that grit from the vocals, doing the necessary cuts and boosts with the EQ and the capitator to push it forward in the mix a little bit more, especially that mid-range, and then 1176. So a lot of what I have here is almost the same with what I had in the first lead bus, which was for the chorus, just a few tweaks here and there. So yeah, this one, pretty slow attack, fastest release, and the 2A to give it body and also to still, glue it into the mix. Then the SSL EQ again, final EQ to carve the sound, make sure that I'm getting only what I want. And then the Pro NB to keep the vocal really consistent across the entire frequency spectrum. And yeah, with all of that, this is what we have.
I used to think that I was a player, but right now, so the man's on the bench. Other girls like Acapella, but you make me feel like man's in the Benz. Bambi, you sweet like candy. Your love done they hide the man like brandy. Feet make an evil man speak Chinese like from Jing Sao Fu Jing to Chan Li. See what that means is whoa.
So that's basically what's happening, and then I'm sending them to this reverb, and I'm sending the verse to the doubler, and sending everything else to this reverb. On the reverb, what I have is so I've turned off this fruity stock reverb because I wanted to use this, so I went ahead to use the pure plate from UAD instead. I have it at this is about 1.4 or so decay time, and then I have low cut all the way up to 100, pre-delay, just a little bit of pre-delay, about 8 milliseconds of pre-delay. So sending everything to the reverb.
I used to think that I was a player, but right now, so the man's on the bench. Other girls like Acapella, but you make me feel like man's in the Benz. Bambi, you sweet like candy. Your love done they hide the man like brandy. Feet make an evil man speak Chinese like from Jing Sao Fu Jing to Chan Li. See what that means is whoa. I'll be your man, you be my missus. Whoa.
Right. So moving on from that, let's get into the master boss and see what we're doing. So the first thing I have is the fruity clipper. So I've pulled this back a little bit to make sure that the entire song is, within a safe range and we have decent amount of headroom.
I used to think that I was a player, but right now, so the man's on the bench. Other girls like Acapella, but you make me feel like man's in the Benz. Bambi, you sweet like candy. Your love done they hide the man like brandy.
And then the next is I'm gluing everything together with this T-Rax bus compressor.
I used to think that I was a player, but right now, so the man's on the bench. Other girls like Acapella, but you make me feel like man's in the Benz. Bambi, you sweet like candy. Your love done they hide the man like brandy.
Next is saturation. I'm using black box to saturate the entire mix, to pump more life into it. And this is what it sounds like.
I used to think that I was a player, but right now, so the man's on the bench. Other girls like Acapella, but you make me feel like man's in the Benz. Bambi, you sweet like candy. Your love done they hide the man like brandy.
And then the next I have this SPL PQ, which I'm just using to, control the frequency across board, across the entire mix. So what I'm doing is I'm pulling down just 0.5 dB of 30 hertz, just make sure that that low end is not really sounding boomy and then overpowering the entire mix. And then around 245, I'm also pulling out 1.5 dB to control that area. That frequency area is responsible for weight and body and beef, but it's also responsible for mod if not properly controlled or if not properly balanced. So I just pulled it back a little bit to tame the mod around that region. And then around 630, I'm taking out just a little bit, 0.5 dB. And then I'm pushing up around 2.1K, just 0.5 dB, to bring the entire mid-range forward a little bit. And then here, I'm not really doing much. So yeah, that's what we have as far as EQ goes.
I used to think that I was a player.
Woo.
I used to think that I was a player, but right now, so the man's on the bench. Other girls like Acapella.
Right, and then the next I have clipper from Plugin Alliance, the BX clipper, just shaving off peaks, excess peaks, especially from that rim, because I realized that was what was causing a lot of the peaks to jump.
I used to think that I was a player.
Oh man, my CPU is really screaming at me right now. Okay, and after that I have the Fruity Parametric EQ, just taking out everything below 35, everything above 17K is also being shaved off. And then the next we have the limiter, to push up loudness and to make everything up front really loud.
I used to think that I was a player, but right now, so the man's on the bench.
I'm really sorry about this audio dropouts. So it's happening because I currently have OBS going on. I'm recording the audio into Cubase, so I have Cubase on and working. I have OBS on and working. I have all these plugins on and running, everything. Because within the session itself, I didn't have all these audio dropouts. But yeah, because of this tutorial, it's happening. So yeah, I have Pro L2 and I have it on the modern setting. And after that, I have the brick wall limiter just to make sure that nothing crosses the 0 point. So I have the output ceiling at -1, and then I've pushed up the input just a little bit to get about at most 1 dB of gain reduction from the limiter. So that's everything within this mix. I'm really sure you got value from this video. I'm really sure that this was very insightful. So if you like this video, please leave me a like, drop me a comment, and as well subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. If you need mixing and mastering services, you can always reach me in my DM. I'll also link my socials down below so that you can contact me if you need mixing and mastering services. So yeah, thank you for sticking around, and I'll see you in the very next video.
Them don't dribble
Stay
play
blessed.